Hi there. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Crystal Wittevrongle, collaborating with Common Sense Edmonton, here today with Danny Heikkinen, who is running for City Council in Ward sipiwiyiniwak in Edmonton's upcoming 2025 election. Danny, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Crystal, thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Well, I'd love to hear more about you and your background and what's bringing you to City Hall. What would you bring to City Hall?
Okay, well, this isn't my first rodeo. I actually ran 4 years ago in the last municipal election, which was a bit of a learning curve. My background is that I have a degree in psychology from the University of Alberta. I was originally trained, or at least focused on lab research. My degree looks very nice on my wall. I don't get to use it very often, as I'm sure is the case for many grads. I'm a small business owner here in Edmonton with two businesses in Edmonton and one in Sherwood Park. And so I guess what gives me a bit of a different perspective that I hope to bring to City Hall is one, data analysis, because like I said, trained for lab research, and then also kind of a business owner perspective on efficiency and asking questions of, why, asking administration, why do we do the things that we do? Because I feel like the answer might very well be because this is how we've always done it, which to me is more like folklore than good governance.
Yes, yeah, the status quo is a funny thing, isn't it?
It is. It's easy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for us.
Exactly. And so, what are some of your priorities for this election? And what are you hearing from people in your ward as being top priorities?
So the top three priorities, and generally in this order, are property taxes, infill, and safety. Right. So they've seen an increase in disorder or crime on the streets. Some of them have experienced it on our transit system, but those are my priorities: fiscal responsibility, the infill issue or question, and safety.
Okay, well, let's dig into those a little bit then.
Please.
Property taxes. What is your perspective on the current level? I know it's been a massive increase year after year, and people are really feeling it. What do you plan to do in City Hall about that?
Well, I've made it fairly clear on my platform, which was live in April, which is that 30% increase over the last 4 years. I think that we deserve a bit of a freeze so in our first year as a council, we should freeze the incoming 6.8% tax increase. And I'm very much a firm believer in doing an audit, not only of city spending for the last 4 years, but also of departments. The audit of spending is to justify, like, what have we been spending money on? Is it actually seeing value? Are there things that we could be doing differently? Should we reprioritize? Most people are very much in agreement on that, whether they identify on the left or the right of the political spectrum, but many of them agree, yes, we need to understand what's going on. And by the way, not have it buried in a 95-page report either. So I very much want everyone to know the reality of the situation. So that's kind of it on property taxes, because from there, when we build the new budget, we can actually see, okay, what was working, what wasn't working. Let's stop doing the things that aren't really bringing any kind of change or value. And let's focus on those things that the public have identified are key priorities.
And so, on the spending issue, then, do you have ideas of areas that spending could be cut already, or is that something you'd have to dig into when you're on City Council?
So there are three areas already that the city should address. So I'm not a proponent of bike lanes. I think I've seen some numbers as high as 170 million spent over the last 4 years on bike lanes. Less than 2% of the population uses them. I don't think that's a good usage of tax dollars right now, especially when we have affordability issues, when we're struggling as a city. I don't think that's a good usage. This comes from someone else running another riding, but they came up with an estimate that if the not-for-profits or organizations that are receiving grant money from the city, but they're not complying with reporting rules, if we stopped funding them because they're not complying, we could actually reduce taxes by 9%, which is a staggering number. And I'm sure some of them will comply afterwards. But the point is, there are rules, let's follow them, right? If it makes sense. And then finally, there are issues like the funicular here in the city, which I don't know if you know what the funicular is.
No.
Okay, so imagine an enclosed glass elevator that operates at an angle.
Okay, yes.
You can actually look this up. And for the viewers of this video, the Edmonton Journal wrote an article in June, roughly June of 2022, is the last time we have any data reported, right? So we don't know, since June, we have no idea how much it costs to operate or maintain, how many people actually use it. So this is kind of an example, one of many examples of, well, what value are we getting? And if we're not getting that, then by all rights, we can question what else is being reported. And finally, and I should say finally, the last bit is this previous council has had an issue with selling property to developers for $1 or under market value, and then realizing that they need that prime land later for development, and then paying 10 times the amount, like millions of dollars to get it back. Lease the property for 10, 20, 30 years so that if the property is developed, it's generating revenue for the city, leave it alone. But if it's underdeveloped, you don't pay a dime. The city owns it again after a certain amount of time. So just some forethought there.
Yeah, definitely. And that's very interesting. So I come from kind of the nonprofit world. I have a lot of experience in the nonprofit world. So it's alarming to me to hear that that they're not meeting reporting requirements, because to me, in my line of work, in my experience, that's just not an option. So it's very alarming.
And I was the president of for the last 2 years, I was president of the Edmonton Intercultural Center, which is a not-for-profit that serves as an incubator. But I was also VP of Community Options, another not-for-profit. But in both of them, our reporting was, because we received government funding, our reporting had to be up to date and accurate. So I can understand it's troubling that there are many organizations that just aren't really complying with the rules.
Yeah.
Welcome to reality, I guess.
Exactly. And so, on the issue of spending still, we've seen drastic quality decreases, or at least perceived quality decreases in certain services like snow removal, for instance. How do you plan to kind of balance the need for increased quality with spending in that? Like, it's a core city service, and perhaps more spending might be needed, or not. But what do you think about that?
So I think the first thing that we look into, so remember I mentioned auditing spending, but also departments. So that if departments aren't delivering the service that is, say, expected of the voter, the taxpayer, as well as council, then we need to look into policy and what guides their decision making. Snow clearing is actually, I think, an easy one. So if you look up the city's snow and ice control policy, you'll see that our neighborhoods and communities are priority 4. So main roads are priority 1, feeder lanes, bus lanes and bike lanes, which I feel like kind of bus lanes should be part of main roads, but then our communities are priority 4. So as the budget, which is currently, I think, $66 million for snow clearing, gets used up, we might see some service, we might not see any. I think it's a simple policy change to move us from priority 4, rejig the areas so that we're priority 2, making sure that those key areas are still done in priority 1 that we all need, but our communities should be a higher priority, because then in some of the older neighborhoods that make up my riding, drainage isn't up to snuff. So by clearing out that snow, only maybe a handful of the communities, or 50% of them really, which handful is kind of an interesting number when you say 50%. But then by clearing out the snow, by making sure it's gone, then we cut down on the amount of potholes, the ruts, the issues that occur, because it's not just the damage to the infrastructure, over time, but also people's property, their vehicles.
And so then do you see kind of like a reallocation of existing funds within that if you're changing the priorities, or it's the same amount of funding, or what would you see as being necessary in order to do that?
First step, obviously the policy change.
Yeah.
It's rather simple, right? You make a motion in council, you move the policy around, you change the priorities. Then we have to see how that's going to perform, because perhaps $66 million is enough money to clear the snow that we need. But if it isn't, then we can revisit it the following year and go, okay, now that we've changed the policy, clearly, and some years are going to have more snowfall than others. So if you have to bump the budget up a little bit to meet a level of expectation, that's good. However, the other issue is that we need to change how the city budgets, because as you're no doubt aware with government, they spend the budget or they lose it. And we need to change that mentality, because spending money because of the fear that you're going to lose it next year is part of the problem.
Absolutely. And so in addition to like snow removal, what are, in your vision or your view, what are the core priorities of City Council? Because in recent years, we've seen City Council take on priorities that most people would argue are not in their jurisdiction or their purview. So what is your perspective on that?
So on my website, I have a very clear list of like what the city's supposed to be responsible for, like rec
Mhm.
centers, EPS, fire service, fixing roads, snow removal, as we've discussed. But I understand that the city's taken on some other aspects that are outside of their purview, like housing. Right, that's kind of a multi-government level kind of issue, not just the
Yeah.
city. Um, what I'd like us to do, so because of again going all the way back to the auditing point, is identify like just those things that we can agree on that are core services, which
Mhm.
it's what are the things that are jurisdiction. Make sure that we're focusing on those, funding those, and then anything beyond that, begin working with other levels of government where those issues are their responsibility, and go, okay, we've got a handle on things. How are you going to address this? And then
Mhm.
see if we can't work with them a little bit better. I know I suspect at some point we'll be talking about homelessness, which is a big issue in the city. And so I've got a proposal for that as well. But essentially, it's making sure we stay in our lane, right? You've probably heard this
Mhm.
before. Stay in our lane, and only engage in those areas of outside of our purview, along with the other level of government. Because at the ground level, right, we are boots on the street. We are the ground level of government.
Mhm.
We can guide the conversation, but we shouldn't be taking responsibility for it directly without support, because then we get into the situation we're currently at, where I believe the city's currently 4.4 billion in debt, borrowing off of the
Yeah.
community revitalization levy. And what have we to show for it?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's something to be said about working with other levels of government, especially in these areas, like you've mentioned. But we've seen in recent years the relationship with specifically the provincial government has gotten quite strained,
Mhm.
to say it nicely. What would you do in city council to try to rebuild that relationship so that we can work effectively with the province on things like mental health and addictions or healthcare, like issues that they are supposed to be and are jurisdictionally responsible for?
Perfect. Well, my opinion only, but I suspect others might view it the same way. This council, as I believe in the last 12 years, has been fairly antagonistic
Mm.
to the provincial government, and I don't believe that that's the right way to go about it publicly. I think that publicly we're all smiles, we're working together. Privately, though, that's where we give other levels of government the gears, where we can challenge them on their positions and give them the grace to back down from it instead of calling them
Hmm.
out publicly.
Hmm.
In the last year or two, I think you remember the mayor and council said, "Hey, we're declaring a housing emergency."
Hmm.
Um, and yet, what did that do? Right? It was, I believe, it was scoring cheap political points with their supporters against a provincial government that is um, perhaps not as favorably viewed in the city. So
Hmm.
it was politics, but it was cheap politics. I think
Yeah.
that by publicly saying we're working together, right? Because you don't have a choice in who you work with in their levels of government, but privately challenging them on their views, that's where we can get the most work done. Because I'm sure you're aware, no one likes being told they're wrong publicly and shamed. Let's do that privately.
It's like, your spouse and you're out in public, you're not gonna kind of call them on something publicly.
Nope,
You'll talk about it at
we're
home.
united in public, but that's when but behind closed doors, that's when we can go, I really didn't appreciate that.
Yeah, exactly. But I think
Yeah.
that that's partially a virtue of how things go these days. Like, it's politically speaking, if you look online, there's mudslinging kind of everywhere. It's the sensational nature of media nowadays. It's what gets attention. It's very unfortunate because it's the residents of cities in this case that are really paying the price for two levels of government that can't work together.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it would be nice to see that repaired as we move through this next couple of years with a new council. But let's talk a little bit about the second priority that you mentioned, which was infill development.
Yeah.
I know that this was a very big issue for many Edmontonians. They don't agree with the pace, the scale, they weren't engaged, and the list goes on. What does your ward think about this? And then what do you intend to do in city council regarding this policy?
Well, the majority, so having gone through about three-quarters of the riding, the majority of the riding is against infill as it currently exists under the blanket zoning bylaw.
Hmm.
And my position back in April, which I presumed was going to be the case, is that we need to. So I'm in favor of having a renewed conversation about the issue. So what I would like to do, and I hope council would support, is repeal bylaw 20001, which is the blanket zoning bylaw, and revert back to the previous bylaws that governed zoning. The reason for this, obviously, is that communities were given more power over approving or being able to push back against development that they didn't feel fit the character of their neighborhood, right? Protecting the character of a mature neighborhood. Parking, actually, under the blanket zoning bylaw, any new construction, parking does, but whether street or on the unit, is actually not a restriction or consideration for that development. Under the previous bylaws, it was. And so when we look at older neighborhoods where the infrastructure was designed for a single family household, now if we build a duplex in a mid-level unit lot, which I think is the biggest restriction, like we should only be building duplexes in those mid-unit lots if approved, but also corner units, like where they're building these 8plexes, is ridiculous. I think a 4plex is the most that should be built, again, if approved. But again, parking needs to be a consideration, because in many of these areas, you can't quadruple the population and not have any consideration for parking, because there's going to be at least one vehicle per family minimum. And it's not fair to the people that bought into neighborhoods for their character, for what they've enjoyed, and then have it forcibly changed without any say, right? There's, yes, the city needs to densify. Yes, that's a fair argument, but respecting your community is also, I think, an equal partner in this, and you have to balance the two. Also, and this is an interesting thing, some lawyers have said that restricted covenants, which were enforceable under the previous bylaws, very nebulous as to whether they actually have any strength or force under the blanket zoning bylaw. So, you and your community could put on land title only single family dwellings. Now under the blanket zoning bylaw, doesn't. There are some organizations or some groups that say has no standing. So I think most people are in agreement. Go back to the previous bylaws, stop what we're doing, and then have an actual good conversation, both with the development community, right, but with the neighborhoods, to decide what's a fair and equitable way of moving forward, right, that respects your property rights and respects the fact that you've chosen this community, while also realizing that there's a fair discussion to be had about whether the city should expand more or build up where we are, right? It's, who knows which is the right way to go about it, but we should be respecting our communities more. The fact that Ward 7 sipiwiyiniwak has many mature communities, I think they want me to fight for them.
Yeah. And what would you change about the way that people were engaged to begin with, like in moving forward to rebuild that trust with people on this issue or similar issues?
So here's something that most people don't really talk about. The city plan by which the administration operates for the last 4 years has been very rigorously followed. And the issue with that is that it should be a guide, not, this is the word, this is what we'll do. So we need to change how the city plan is worded and how it's composed, because if you've ever had to complain to the city about something, as we did in Garapi, where I live, where we had the urban revitalization, many people complained about the fact that we didn't like what they had planned, and they went ahead and did it anyway, because that's what's in the plan. So we have to change the plan going forward for the next so many years, allow them to have off ramps, so that if a community goes, we don't want what this is, then city administration and your councillor needs to be present for an actual engagement, actual conversation, as opposed to what essentially becomes fait accompli. You can complain all you want, but the decision's already been made. So legitimate actual engagement, where the majority, 51% of people say we don't want this in our neighborhood. Okay. That's how it'll be.
Yeah, exactly. And so what do you think about transit-oriented development and what role densification should play in that regard or in that consideration?
Well, there's actually been a lot of people that have complained about the transit system. Like, they don't like the on-demand system, which apparently is privatized, which was, news to me. I'm a bigger fan of going back to like bus rapid transit and having the city buses. But I understand, building this densification allows us to get more people on our transit routes potentially. But what I believe might be a better option for determining, where we put transit routes and how we develop them, is, so you take a map of the city, you overlay it with population density figures, and then you overlay that with registered vehicle data from the province. And then building out your transit system, you look at the places where there's a lack of registered vehicles, meaning these are people who will take transit. And so we build a system to serve them. So it's clean, it's safe, it's efficient. And then we build it out from there so that those people who do drive but could take transit are now more incentivized to do so because it works so well. So I guess this is where the business, the customer service side of it comes. You build a system that serves your customers, your core users really, really well, and then everyone else will be more inclined to use it. I think that's how we can deal with the density issue, because obviously demographics change, people move around. We need to have a system that's flexible to adjust to it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, transit itself is a big issue, and I know you kind of touched on it earlier when you mentioned safety, and a lot of folks are just kind of avoiding transit in general for the either very real risk of safety or the perception of safety. And so, what are your thoughts on what the city's currently doing in regards to safety for transit?
Well, over the last 4 years, I would say very little. I actually have a friend who's a bus driver for many years, and he reached out and he said, "Where can I take a PAL course, right, a position acquisitions license?" And I said, "Oh, I think you can just go to Cabela's and find out when they have a course." I go, "Why do you want that?" He goes, "Because a bunch of us are looking at buying stab-proof vests, and the only way we can do that is with a PAL, and the city won't provide them." So I guess in response, I don't think the city's really taking a good look at it, prioritizing it. So like on our LRT, right, my proposal is turnstiles at the stations, right? So you have to, in many parts of the world, you have to pay to use the system. And we want to keep, air quotes, undesirables out of the system, right? And we want transit officers that patrol the trains that are at the stations so that we can prevent the assaults that we hear about anecdotally on the trains. We can prevent the open drug use that occurs, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, perception, well, if you perceive something, perception is reality. So if people see the system isn't safe, we need to do something to give them the perception of safety, but also follow it up with legitimate safety. As for the bus system, that's harder. That's much harder to keep safe, but it's no less important. I just don't know if I have a good answer for improving the safety on the bus system as I do on our LRT.
Yeah. And so when you said transit officers, do you mean like the peace officers or like EPS on trains or in the station?
So peace officers, now correct me if I'm wrong, because I'll admit I don't know the full scope of the powers of peace officers, but can peace officers execute warrants?
I don't believe so, but I'm also unsure on
Okay.
that. I think that there's more of a um, see, not enforce, or like be there for the view, or can maybe
Right.
give out tickets, but I don't think that they can arrest or do things of that nature. But yeah, I'm not
Fair
entirely
question.
positive.
Okay, so that kind of gives you that kind of question then gives you my perspective of what we need. The transit, I believe a year or two ago, the province actually sent 50 sheriffs into both Edmonton and Calgary, which allowed the cities to push EPS officers onto the trains, and it saw a marked decrease in crime and violence. So there's your answer. We need transit officers who have the ability to do more than just shoo you along or issue a ticket. We need transit officers that can actually execute warrants, that can actually arrest people and enforce some of our bylaws and legislation, as opposed to shooing them along. Because one of my biggest beefs is the fact that many bylaws in the city are unenforceable, whether by design or just that we haven't really looked into it. And so that needs to matter, right? We need to focus on that as well. So I think that's how we make it a little bit safer, is that we actually have transit officers that can actually enforce the rules and not just issue a ticket.
Yeah. And so with the fare gates or the closed system that you had
The
mentioned,
turnstiles, yeah.
the turnstiles, what if that costs an extreme amount of money to implement in all systems, or would you pilot it? Like, what would you suggest in introducing something like that where it hasn't been introduced before?
So to begin with, there are certain stations where it's just not feasible, right? Like around the Bonnie Doon area, right? There's just a station that's wide open. Like there's no enclosure there. But in other areas like downtown, you could have those gates. So I think the first step is, before we spend any money, is we identify which areas are going to be the best places to start a pilot program,
Mm-hmm.
and what areas are going to be the beginner, right? What's
Yeah.
most affected? Where do we get the most reports? Great. Let's start doing something here. And then, because we're not going to be doing it everywhere, but what can we do to support it? Because just because we put up some gates, some turnstiles on some stations, if that just moves the problem further down the line, well, then to me, that's an indication that it's working, right? Because if those issues are just moving to another station that's easier to access, okay, well, then
Yeah.
now we know that this is working and we'll keep doing it, but it has to be open to the public, right? Like we have to be very judicious in what we do here. We can't just do something and say we know better. It's here's what we're going to do, here's why we're going to do it, and then here's when we'll be able to theoretically report results to you, and then make sure that those results are true, right?
Yeah.
And we don't sugarcoat them. It either works or it doesn't, but I think that'd be the responsible way to go about it.
And then in terms of the folks that it's keeping out, like, let's say people that have nowhere to sleep or need somewhere warm to go as we move into winter, what do you think should be done in that regard if, these folks are being pushed out of a space? Does the city have a role to play in assisting those people?
Okay, so I'm really glad you asked. So this gets down to the homeless policy. And by the way, I use homelessness, I'm not unhoused or houseless, because I feel like the issue is that we sanitize our language and it needs to have impact. So anyone watching this, if you wonder why I say homelessness when others will say otherwise, I want it to have that impact because it's a serious issue. So my platform point calls for working with the provincial and federal government to create shipping container housing, because our current system is not working, right? 4 years ago when I last ran, 3,100 people were on the street. Today we're over 5,000. So whatever we're doing isn't working. So let's look at something that's not radical. It's worked in other jurisdictions in Canada and around the world. So for an affordable, an affordable shelter or a shelter space per unit, and this comes from some directors in the city or some other candidates, $500,000, right, to build and operate. Whereas a shipping container home, you can build it for $50,000 to $60,000. So it's 10 times less. It's mobile. And so I think what we do is we build for $254 million roughly, which is a fraction of the money that the city has received over a decade to try and resolve this issue. We find a place to put it. We can build 3,000 units. Now we identify, who do we put in those units? We identify the people that are, interested in dealing with their addiction, dealing with their mental health issues or their financial issues, and giving them the support, because those are the people that want the help. Right. And we hear that all the time. It's the ones that do, the ones that don't. So the ones that do, this is what we do for you. The ones that don't, we can at least take the money and also work with, again, the federal and provincial government to renovate shelter spaces that are in at night, out in the morning, to provide some stability, because then these people won't be sleeping in train stations or, in the warm enclosure of your bank. They're going to have somewhere that they can go to that provides them with some stability. The other issue is that it needs to provide them with security, because there's horror stories that we hear of people going to shelters and getting mugged. We got to end that too. Like it's a complex problem, I understand, but we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just taking something that works elsewhere and using it. So to answer your question of getting them out, instead of letting them sleep at the LRT, let's give them a little bit of dignity, and here's a better place for you to go.
Yeah, exactly. And then kind of safety more generally. The relationship in previous years between City Council and EPS and the Police Commission has been strained. Some might call it dysfunctional. What do you plan to do if you're in City Council to rebuild that? Because, safety trickles down from there, trust trickles down from there. So what will you do to improve that?
Well, I actually attended an EPS event where I believe 2 years ago we had 178 officers per 100K residents, and today we're at about 165. So, I guess to answer more fulsomely, I understand full well that the EPS is a very difficult job. right?
Hmm.
Like they see the worst that society has to offer. So we need to let them know that, we're there for you. We support you. We absolutely want to work with you. When we call for accountability and transparency, it's not to cut your funding. It's not to
Hmm.
slap your hand. It's to go, what do you need to engage with? Like, what
Hmm.
more do you need from us to help you engage? Especially as I believe early on in this last council's tenure, they actually redirected money from EPS to other places, only then to
Hmm.
bring it back because people didn't like the idea of policing being an option. But we also have Reach, which is a
Hmm.
211, which engages with the police. So we actually have a decent system being built that police aren't always the first option, right? There's
Hmm.
someone else that can be engaged. So I think it's like letting them know, hey, we are here to work with you, right?
Yeah.
We do understand your job is difficult. Tell us, to get back from 165 back up to somewhere in the 170s, which means hiring more officers. But, what do you need to be able to better respond to calls to service?
Hmm.
Because then, again, it's that visible presence, right?
Yeah.
It's that perception. It's also understanding that I don't know if you know this, but the gangs have been really good at recruiting youth digitally.
Mm.
So at a number of events, I've asked EPS, and Warren Dreichel, who's the new chief, was at one of them. Um, how do you adapt now to this digital world
Yeah.
where you know the criminal element essentially is finding a way to circumvent your old way of doing things and adapting.
Hmm.
um, no different than with the provincial government. Hey, we're here to work together. We're here for you.
Hmm.
Tell us what you need, and then tell us what we can do sustainably to keep you going. um, but I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure if there's. I know some people ask me. They're like, "Well, how much do they actually need? How much? Where do we need to go?" Man, if I had that option, if I had that answer, trust me, I'd be a well-paid consultant. But but let's start with you have our backing, you have our support. We're not going to take money from you. What can we do that's concrete that will
Hmm.
see immediate payoff in the next 2 to 3 years?
Hmm.
Right.
And
Let's identify
so,
that.
yeah, yeah. There's been some conversation around the transparency of
Mhm.
EPS budget. And, maybe a little bit of friction there with regards to areas where it isn't very transparent and maybe it's necessary for operational purposes, but council or, other funders don't have the capacity to really understand where money is going sometimes. What do
Mhm.
you think about that? Like what would you do to improve that, at least to give council a better viewpoint on actually what's costing what.
So at that EPS event, one of the council candidates from another riding asked that very question: is why can't we see more transparency from you and how the money is spent? And the
Mhm.
answer that was given by one of the officers there, one of the deputy chiefs, was that by showcasing every dollar and how we spent it, might very well give away investigation techniques and sources that we use
Mhm.
uh, that we're afraid to give up. Now, I don't know, to be perfectly honest, I don't know if that's a legitimate answer or if
Mhm.
that's just kind of a obfuscation of it. But I think that the first step would be that council would have a private meeting, right? A private audit, show
Mhm.
us the reality, right? With the expectation that we will not openly disclose this unless we can be assured that if this does in fact compromise the integrity of your investigations and the techniques that you use, we're not going to talk about it. But if
Mhm.
we can be a bit more open about what and where, uh, I mean, we owe it to the taxpayer.
Mhm.
I believe in accountability, transparency. I also respect, though, that sometimes being, especially with the police or especially with security, being completely transparent just gives away how they do things that are effective.
Yeah.
So you got to, again, it's a balancing act. I want to give the public everything. I just realize that perhaps we can't give them everything because then it'll become ineffective.
Mhm.
And I know that's not an answer people are going to want, but that's
It's a reality though.
reality, right? We have to be the adults in the room sometimes.
Mhm. And so
Yeah.
what role do you see the public playing in keeping EPS accountable?
Well, that's a good question. So when you say the public, like obviously there's the commission, there's the committee, and I believe some of the public, can apply to be on that committee. But you just
Mhm.
mean like the voter, the general
Just
average
the
voter.
general public, yeah.
I actually don't know what system would make sense to put into play that would allow the general public to either approve or disapprove of police efforts.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't think there's a reasonable way to do it. Like, hey, here's what the police are doing this month, or this is what we did last year. Up vote, down
Hmm.
vote. What did you like?
Yeah.
Maybe that is something that we can do. Is the police service can create a report to the public and go, here's what we did. Break it down by region, by issue, etc. Based off your experience, tell us what you think. Up vote, down vote, and based off of that raw democracy, that can be the feedback for the police service to go, okay, the people are really upset about how we handle this. Let's
Hmm.
change it. But then we get to hold their feet to the fire that if they say this is what we need to change and no change is forthcoming, well, then it falls to us to try and force that change.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
perhaps that's the way we do it, is just raw democracy.
Hmm. Well, and
Yeah.
then through things like the police commission as well, where council members are directly, engaged and involved.
Mhm.
How do you think the police commission and council and EPS, that relationship, does the public have a role in helping that relationship, or are they just, on the other side of what happens with that relationship? If that makes sense.
No, I get what you're trying to say. Um, so have you ever been on a board before?
Yes.
I'm guessing yes. Okay, obviously, because not for profit. So yes, boards are generally restricted in the size because they need to be able to make a decision. You have too many people now giving their
Hmm.
input. You become paralyzed with indecision. So
Hmm.
I think that keeping the current process as we have it for right now, because it's what we've had forever, and I don't want to go
Yeah.
start changing things for the sake of changing them. But if there's a way to bring in the public's opinion without affecting the efficiency of the board or the commission and the committees,
Hmm.
I think that's how we do it. Because again, if you had if you had a board of 40 people, well, and we have counselors, we have members of the police service, we have a bunch of the public on there. If the average person doesn't really understand the what and the why, right? If they don't have a foundation of information or knowledge
Yeah.
to begin with, as much as I like to engage, I want the public to be engaged. What I've found over the course of the last 4 years campaigning is that most people don't really understand what's going on. So, you, how much time would you really be spent just bringing them up to speed?
Yeah.
And while that's not a bad thing, again, you don't want to be paralyzed by indecision, and you
Hmm.
don't want to be paralyzed into inactivity because you need to get a hold of everyone's responses. That's why we have a council. That's why we have these boards. Is where
Hmm.
those individuals bring the input to the table,
Hmm.
we do our best. And
Yeah.
and the public will hold us accountable one way or another.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so this election is different and interesting for many reasons, one of which is that we are seeing parties now at the
Yes.
political or at the municipal level. Are you involved with any of these parties, and how does that impact your race for city council?
So I'm independent. And I'm happy to be independent because my experience at the doors has generally been that not many people are actually in favor of the party system. They believe that
Hmm.
municipalities should be independent.
Hmm.
Um, my so this is on public record. Anyone can look this up. So I actually, after my first failed municipal election, I was asked to and succeeded in winning the nomination and running as the United Conservative candidate in the last provincial election for my
Okay.
riding of McClung, which is a small subsection of the municipal riding.
Hmm.
And I got chased off of someone's property with a shovel. So that was as a conservative running under a banner. Running as an independent, it's great because
Hmm.
no one it hasn't become polarized yet. So
Yeah.
I'm proud to be independent. I believe that the idea of parties at the municipal level doesn't make a lot of sense because, as you've seen both federally and provincially, when you speak out against the party,
Hmm.
um, in favor of what is good for the public, you get kicked from the party, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So you might as well be independent to begin with, because the only
Yeah.
people who should be kicking you out are the voter, because you're there to serve them.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Danny, this has been a very interesting conversation, and I've really enjoyed hearing your perspectives. And if you're going to leave one thing with our viewers, whether or not they're in your ward, what's one thing you'd like to leave behind today?
I want you to get involved. The average voter turnout in Edmonton is 35% on average. Municipal politics has the greatest impact on your life, followed then by provincial, admittedly federal for different reasons. But this is the most, municipal elections are the most important because they decide how your city is run and how much of a say you actually have in that. So please, regardless of who you vote for, go out and vote, get involved, pick the person who's going to be, I think, the best able to do the job. But just get involved because we need you.
Mhm. Well, I think you stole all of my closing remarks there, but I'll say them again because I love hearing my own voice. So yes, I echo Danny your thoughts and your comments there. Please, to our viewers, get informed, stay engaged, and get out and vote. Danny, thank you once again. This has been really great. Thank you so much.
Crystal, honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.